names of these old baseball players. They just don't have names like this anymore.
Hap Felsch.
Kennesaw Mountain Landis.
Yeah,
I mean, he wasn't a baseball player, but he was a judge and a commissioner.
Do you know why he's named Kennesaw Mountain?
No.
Kennesaw Mountain was a battle in 1864, actually fought on my birthday, oddly enough, June 27th. The Confederates won. It was in Georgia during Sherman's March to the Sea, the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain.
Sherman's March, one of the
Landis.
most brutal marches. They literally burned everything on that march, but
yeah, pretty much. But yeah, that was a minor. I shouldn't say minor, but that was a major engagement during the Georgia campaign.
Okay.
But yeah, federal judge. Did you hear the recent controversy with him?
No.
So, besides his hardline stance on gambling, Landis, the other thing that he's known for is being a very strict segregationist.
Oh, yes, the gentleman's agreement.
Yes, the gentleman's agreement. And he delayed Jackie Robinson by about 15 to 20 years.
Yeah.
And they're talking about taking him because the MVP for each league is called the Kennesaw Mountain Landis Award.
Yeah, and they're talking about taking him off.
Taking him off, yeah. I mean,
It's an interesting because if the color barrier was broken earlier, would it have been the same outcome? And you know what I mean?
I'll tell you this. If the color barrier is broken in 1925, 1930, baseball, they refer to the 50s as the golden age. I don't think baseball ever would have been knocked off its pedestal because of people like Satchel Paige and Josh Gibson and Cool Papa Bell playing in the league in their primes. I'll tell you this too. The Yankees can't sign everybody.
Oh, yes.
Which means there's more parity throughout the league because you have this influx of talent that every team can have. Like a big reason why the Red Sox suck so much from 46 to 67, which is 46 the year they went to the World Series and lost to the Cardinals, and 1967 when they finally made it back and lost to the Cardinals, oddly enough, was 47, the color barrier was broken. They were the last team to integrate, and they did it kicking and screaming in 1960. They like the Redskins, basically.
Yeah, they pretty much turned their back on an entire group of not young, but I mean talented baseball players. Because you look at Satchel Paige, he came in when he was like 45 and still took Cleveland to a world championship. You know, it's ridiculous to think, and I would have loved the statistics on Satchel Paige because everyone says, oh, I mean, he had 90 no-hitters or what, but they just didn't keep stats.
Josh Gibson might have beat Babe Ruth
in
a season for a home run.
Exactly.
Honestly, I mean,
we just don't know, and that's the big thing that sucks.
Yeah, I mean, you denied it players that. I remember reading a story about how Willie Mays, before he even tried out for the Giants, tried out for the Red Sox.
Yeah,
and their owner Tom Yaki was a super racist, bigoted person, and he wanted nothing to do with Willie freaking Mays.
I know, one of the best players of his era.
Of all time, honestly.
Yeah, I mean,
the ultimate five-tool guy.
Yeah, the ultimate. That's something that, and in baseball, if you see that, how could you turn your back on it? It's such a ridiculous, but that's the way these owners were with this gentleman's agreement of like, hey, we're just not going to let the black players come in.
There's a funny story my friend told me. I've researched it and it's backed up. John McGraw, the owner, manager, do everything guy for the New York Giants, was waiting. All he did was wait, and he never got a chance to see it. But he kept detailed notes and scouting reports on Negro Leagues players that he liked in the event that
he could bring them up.
Yeah, if one day the gentleman's agreement ever ends, I want that guy, I want that guy, I want that guy, I want that guy, because my scouts and I with my own eyes have seen these guys play.
Yeah, they pretty much would have had a half black, half white team. He was that ready for the integration of the color barrier to be broken.
And he was a win at all costs manager, so race really didn't mean anything to him. He had tried to break it before by bringing a black guy up and saying he was Indian.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
There's some great stories with that. Saying that he was Native American, and people were like, whoa. Even that's crazy to be people being like, whoa, this is a white game.
And to think that's like 100 years ago only.
Yeah.
Like that stuff was prevalent.
Exactly.
Very weird.
Like my grandpa pretty much played in those leagues.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he was a good baseball player. He pretty much got in those because he was the ninth white guy.
Yeah. I mean, but that's what I mean. Like they talk about the 50s being the golden age. If you have 2 decades of Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige, Cool Papa Bell, oh my God, baseball would have been, who knows, maybe football doesn't even overtake it.
Yeah. Choppy Johnson in there.
Yeah.
Some of the best names.
Oh, dude, the nicknames alone.
Oh, the nicknames, they're the best.
Oh.
They're weirdly accurate.
Yeah.
They're just so, like, to the way they play ball and shit like that. I love it.
Oh, completely.
And with that, I think we're going to get into our next episode. You want to give an intro?
Yeah, welcome to the Sports Experience once again, everybody. I'm Dom DiTolla.
I'm Chris Quinn.
And today we're going to be looking into the 1919 Chicago Black Sox and the fallout from their little scandal.
Yeah, and all the repercussions, all the things that came from this scandal and the effect that gambling had on baseball.
Yep, absolutely. Kind of tying back to our Pete Rose episode, if you go back and listen to that.
That's when they started putting those little, what would you call them? A
signs
poster?
In the locker room?
Yeah, a sign in the locker room that says, hey, don't bet. We went through this.
Yeah.
And there's so many interesting little facts that I found out about this, researching this, but the one that stuck out the most for me was they actually got the name the Black Sox before they ever were caught cheating.
Correct.
I had to bring that up because it was my favorite fact, and I want to get it off with a single. You know, they were actually their manager was such a cheap piece of shit, and we're going to get into this, that he told the players they had to launder their own uniforms.
Charles Comiskey,
who was an ex-baseball player himself and went through the major leagues, and that's the thing that I don't understand is when you're a player yourself and you understand how little they were making. And then you just kind of keep that going.
Yeah.
Like, because he paid his players half of what other teams were paying him.
Yeah, I mean, he was, they said he had deep pockets but short arms. That was always the thing associated with, they called him Kami. That was his nickname, Charles Comiskey.
Their white uniforms got so dirty that other teams started calling them the Black Sox. And this was pre them cheating, or pre, the 1919 World Series. It was the 1919 series, or the regular season.
Yeah, it was, so a little bit of historical background to this 1919 White Sox team is that we're talking about an era of baseball that is pre-New York Yankees dominance, particularly in the American League. And when I say that, what I mean is the 3 dominant teams throughout the 19 teens in the American League, because the leagues didn't play each other, and that was when baseball was nice, because I hate interleague play, just an aside, and I could go on a rant for days about this, is that the 3 teams were the Philadelphia Athletics, led by Connie Mack, who was their do-all owner, manager, everything for them.
Who really revolutionized the way teams...
Yeah, were made up. Baseball was played. Yeah.
The farm system.
Branch Rickey was really the one that took that to steroids for the St. Louis Browns and Cardinals. But so you had the Connie Mack-led A's, powerhouse. Then you had the Boston Red Sox, pre-Curse of the Bambino, when they actually had the Bambino. And then you had, not the Yankees, but the Chicago White Sox.
I was going to say, not the Cubbies, not the Yankees, not the Dodgers.
And I'll just say this, from 1910 to 1919, out of the American League, only those 3 teams made the World Series. Only those 3 teams made the World Series from the American League. Athletics with 4, Red Sox with 2, and the White Sox with 2. And I bring up the White Sox with 2 because before their 1919 run to the World Series where they played the Reds, they won the World Series in 1917. So, I mean, this was a stacked team. Now, what ended up happening, 1918 was kind of a down year because you had some of their better players, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, in the service in World War I. So they kind of skidded to about 4th or 5th in the American League. But 1919, they absolutely ran away with everything because they had everybody back.
Well, this is interesting because of World War I. The owner of, and I'm just spacing on names today, I can't get it, Comiskey, pretty much said because of World War I that the attendance was going to drop, and it did.
That was the big fear throughout the league. He was not alone in thinking that.
Yes, and he cut everyone's salaries.
Yep.
So he cut them to the bone. I mean, they were pretty much working for like minimum wage, if you will.
Yeah.
And when World War I ended in 1919, they had some of their greatest attendance ever.
Don't you hope, not to interject, but don't you hope that's the thing with comedy? If once this COVID nonsense ends, everybody's just going to be so hungry for it.
Oh, God, I want that so bad.
That's kind of what the nation was for baseball because, you're kind of entering the post-Wilsonian era where you're, return to normalcy with Harding. Let's just go watch some baseball and have a good time. This is pre-prohibition. Exactly. I mean, and this is a time, kind of to set things up, where baseball players, and because they came not from rich families, there were no multi-generational baseball families. These were hard scrabble guys, and when they stopped playing ball, they hung out with some hard scrabble people, including gamblers.
Oh, definitely. And it was, to talk about the era, though, it was very much a resurgence of going out of nightclubs. This is when all of this started popping off. And with this, a lot of the baseball players were like, hey, we need to get more money. And a lot of the owners were like, hey, stick it, while they were making millions.
Yes, very much so. I mean, just a very, very interesting era because baseball, it wasn't really at its peak yet.
No.
Really, it was boxing and horse racing, which were the two kings in American
sports. And it kind of took a dive.
It did.
So that's the other thing is nobody really knew that it was going to come back. Nobody really knew. But when it came back with God, it was, they were talking about they almost had double the attendance of the previous year or more. And with that, I mean, obviously there was no TV revenue at that time. So all of their revenue pretty much came from that. But with that, I mean, they pretty much were they were stiffing the players so bad that the players were essentially looking for other ways to make money.
Other sources of revenue.
Yes.
And caught up in this odd whirlwind, honestly, are the 1919 White Sox because they're running away with the AL at this point. I mean, they finished the year first in runs scored, first in runs allowed as far as lowest amount, and second in fielding percentage. This was a powerhouse. I mean, 2 years removed from their second World Series championship.
They essentially could have went on a three-peat with this team if
they very well could have.
That's how good of a team they were. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about their first baseman though, Chick Gamble.
Let's talk about Chick Gamble because he's really, for lack of a better word, the linchpin as far as how this even happened.
Yes. Now, I don't know if you know this. I'm pretty sure you do because it's hard for me to stump you with something, but he played for the Indians 1917? Is that true, or 16?
He was with another franchise, yes, I believe, yeah.
Okay. Well, he played for Cleveland, I think. So
did Joe Jackson.
So did Joe Jackson. But what happened was the manager got wind that he fixed the game.
Yeah.
And they told him that they didn't want him next season. He was one of the best first basemen in baseball at that time, one of the best utility hitters. He wasn't a Joe Jackson, but he was
he was a solid player. He was just a solid overall first baseman that anyone would want on their team as far as skills.
Well, that's the thing is a lot of teams didn't want him after that because they were like, hey, he fixed this game. The White Sox, being the cheapest fucking assholes in the game,
we'll sign you for nothing.
We'll sign you for, and they did. I think they signed him for like $3,500 for the year of 1919, which is crazy cheap.
Oh yeah,
It was crazy cheap for baseball players of that time, like players that weren't half as good as him were getting $10,000 a year, kind of thing.
Exactly.
So it was so ridiculously cheap that you could see that he kind of came in with a chip on his shoulder.
Most definitely, yeah. And because of this, and because of his background with gamblers, remember everyone, this is a time in baseball, like I had said before, where gamblers and players often associated with each other. There have been accusations that previous World Series before 1919 were indeed fixed. There have been rumors that the year before, the Cubs threw the World Series against the Red Sox.
And a lot of these gamblers were ex-baseball players.
They were, and that'll definitely come into play.
A lot of this, I was going to say, they are really run in these same circles where a lot of these guys really know each other from, hey, I used to play with him a couple of years ago, to, hey, he's looking to bet on some games now.
I met this guy at a bar,
exactly.
And we just hit it off. like he grew up like I did.
Yes, a lot of that, because they have very unique experiences for that time of leaving their home when they're 18, playing AA, AAA ball.
Yeah.
And
being out on the road, doing whatever you can to make a buck.
Exactly.
And none of these guys, and well, we can discuss Eddie Collins later, but let's just say Eddie Collins was an exception to the rule. Second baseman for the White Sox, who did not participate, but went to, I believe, Columbia, had 3,000 hits, is in the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
And he was very hated, along with other of his friends on the team, by this faction known as the Black Sox.
Yes. It's so interesting how half of the team was in on the fix and the other half either knew it and turned a blind eye or just flat out didn't know.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so interesting because the way that if going into this World Series, everybody was betting on the White Sox to win. I think the odds were 9-5.
Yeah.
Which, if you don't know odds, that's if you bet $9 on the White Sox, you get
5.
You get 14. You get your 9 back plus 5. After the first game, because everyone. The word was out that it was a fix.
Yeah, this was pre-series because and I think if we want to talk about Gandil, we can get into how during the summer and even September he was talking to people
about fixing the World Series.
Yeah.
About the possibility of it.
Yeah, like they hadn't had anything set in stone, but it was brought up.
How it can be done. It's definitely going to be possible. And that's when we introduce our gamblers, our I don't even know how to. I was going to say reputable gamblers, but I don't even think that goes together.
Let's just say there's some shady individuals, and why don't you take it away from here, Chris?
Well, if you ever watch a mobster movie, through the 90s, they kind of reference this guy, Arnold Rothstein.
Yes.
Who was he was pretty much the biggest gambler in New York. I think he was one of the first ones to build one of the big gambling houses in New York that then made them make gambling illegal in New York.
And he was chummy with Lucky Luciano and all the mafia figures from New York.
I was
going to
say, any mafia figure you can list, they were pretty much all in the same.
And he was familiar with a certain gentleman in Chicago who ran things named Al Capone.
Yes. Named Al Capone. And Arnold Rothstein, I think, pretty much was like, hey, if there's a fix going on in the World Series, I want to be involved in it.
And when Wynn started getting of that, that's when you saw those 9-5 odds start to dissipate.
That's literally what happened was he went out, made all these bets at 9-5, and then the next day, which I think was the first day of the World Series, the betting was either even or the Reds was 6-5, which was crazy.
Yeah, and if you're looking at gambling lines, things like that don't change dramatically overnight.
No, not like that.
I mean, if you have like months to go and a team has an injured player or something like that, obviously the odds have to change, but not dramatically like that.
Even if the White Sox came in and Joe Jackson was injured for the series, I don't think the odds would have switched that much.
Like no, that's if a fix wasn't in.
Yes, if a fix wasn't in. That's how ridiculously known throughout the gambling world that the fix was in.
One thing to add to that I found was very interesting. The White Sox had in those days, it's not the 5-6 guy rotation that it is now. It was a 3-man rotation. It was Eddie Seacott, their ace pitcher, part of the gambling. Claude Lefty Williams, number 2, also part of the gambling. Number 3 was a gentleman by the name of Red Faber. Red Faber was a very good pitcher in his own right. Now, when these players got together and started talking about fixing the series, their catcher, who was not part of the fix, Ray Schalk, was talking about Faber and said, honestly, had Faber pitched because he was injured, because it was a best-of-9 series, I not only think that we would have won, I don't think the fix would have even been in because Faber would have pitched 3 games.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah, I had read that and I was like, oh my God, you're right. But as far as if you want to either get back into the gamblers or talk about the players involved, I mean, I can go either way right now.
Let's go. I kind of want to talk about Seacott right now.
Okay.
You piqued my interest in him. I love the the way the gamblers knew that the fix was in. That was something.
Right.
I just love all these little intricacies in it. Like he threw a strike, first pitch, second pitch, he flat out beams him.
Yeah, when the whole story goes is the fix would be in, and the bettors would know the fix would be in if Seacott hit the first batter.
Yep.
And on the second pitch, he hit him in the back, so they knew it was going on. And Seacott, another guy who was famously stiffed by Comiskey, was like, well, I'm nearing the end of my career. I got to, take care of my family. Like, I need this extra money. And one of the thing with the gamblers was Seacott said, I'm in, but I need $10K up front, and I need it before the first game.
And he was, I think, one of the only ones to be paid up front because a lot of these players ended up being stiffed.
All of the money flowed through Gandil.
Yes.
All of the money flowed through Chick Gandil. And because he was kind of the ringleader, he brought in 7 other players, which is the title of the Asanoff book, 8 Men Out, and later the movie 8 Men Out, starring Charlie Sheen playing one of the players. So it was Chick Gandil first base. It was his best friend on the team, shortstop Swede Risberg. Shoeless Joe Jackson playing left field. Hap Felch, played by Charlie Sheen, out in center. Eddie Seacott, starting pitcher. Claude Lefty Williams, starting pitcher, as I alluded to before. Buck Weaver, the third baseman. Now, he's a very, very interesting player in this.
I wanted to talk about Buck because some people don't think he threw it.
Some people don't, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that he didn't. And he was actually banned for knowing about it, not doing anything. And the last was utility man Freddie McMullen, who was just in it because he was friends with Gandil and knew one of the people who tried to get him to throw it because he played minor league ball with him, Sleepy Bill Burns.
I was going to say he only had 2 hits in the entire, or 2 at-bats in the entire series.
Yeah.
And he still got paid whatever.
Yeah, he was just in it for the money. They had asked, I guess, Hap Felch if he wanted to do it. And at first he's like, no, I want to win the World Series. And then he's like, well, if y'all are throwing it, sign me up.
Yes.
I want to get paid.
Yes.
And I think that was kind of the attitude of a lot of these guys. And one of the things, the reason that it got to the point that it did was because a lot of players were saying like, well, we can't throw the series if Seacott's not pitching, or if Seacott's pitching and he's pitching for real, and we can't do it with Williams because they're going to start 6 of the 9 games.
Yes.
And we can't do it if Joe Jackson's not in it because he's arguably the greatest baseball player in the entire league. Hey, everybody. Just want to take a quick break to let you know that our Sports Experience podcast is brought to you by Engle Studio here, and they're here in Tucson for all your recording needs.
Now, let's get into Shoeless Joe right here, because right after it happened, there were talks about, or not right after, but since it happened, there were talks about him not being involved. And all the evidence that I pulled up was that he was definitely involved.
Yeah, he got paid.
What's your thought?
I mean, all of the players that weren't Buck Weaver, because Weaver went to the original meetings and he said, "Screw this, I don't care."
Yes.
I mean, he had heard the players that were going to throw it out, but he walked away.
Yeah, because he didn't receive any money. Buck Weaver didn't. But Shoeless Joe received money, and there was an incident in Game 3, maybe 2, where he had a ridiculous error where he was like bobbling the ball a bunch.
Yeah, and he missed the cutoff man. Yeah, exactly. Like, people like to say, oh, well, he hit better in the 1919 series than he did in 17 and hit the series only home run. It's like,
that's fine, but that's not what game fixing is.
No, it's not.
Game fixing is taking a little bit off at the exact right moment, and that's what happened when he missed that cutoff man. Was I think the Reds went up 2-0 off of that play, and it's like, that's fine that he hit amazing because he did, but he really had this one play that changed the outcome of the entire game.
He was basically hitting well in games where they were already far behind.
Yes, exactly.
And you can't deny that. I mean, the guy obviously didn't play up to the standard that he should have on an honest level.
That's what Seacott was talking about, was when he was pitching, he would do 3 or 4 pitches that were real.
Yeah.
And then he would take one off, and he would know, because he was a great pitcher, he would know that this guy's looking for one in this zone, and I'm just going to give it to him. And that's what the catcher knowing how Seacott normally pitched, that's when the catcher started being like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah, Schalk was one of the ones that really, the catcher for the White Sox is really one of the ones saying, like, this crap's not on the level. There is no way that him or Lefty Williams, who set a then World Series record of 3 losses in a series, these guys are not pitching up to the standard that they should be. And it's not just because they're nervous or they're had an off day.
There was one, I can't remember if it was Lefty or Seacott, but there was a point where they threw 20 straight fastballs, and the catcher kept signaling curveball, and then he like turned to the manager Kid. He was like, "Hey,
Kid Gleason, he
was like, "Hey man, you gotta take this guy out," because that's when, I think it was Game 5. That's when they really started to be like, "Oh, these guys are really throwing this."
Yeah, no, it's just absolutely insane. As far as the gambling is concerned, though, I mean, I know you mentioned Arnold Rothstein, but
he was at the top.
He was at the very top, but he had some middlemen who kind of ended up spilling the beans after the series, which the White Sox did lose 5-3 in the best of 9. Rumors started about.
Yes, and it's obvious to see where these rumors came from.
Yeah.
Because the betting lines and just the players, like a lot of people were saying, like press would come up and ask the players, like, "Hey, this is kind of ridiculous," and their responses were either silence or obvious lies.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's one of those things where it was just so obvious in 1920 when they started compiling all this information.
Yeah, and the thing about that is that kind of made this thing even bigger than it should have been was the fact that baseball, like the American and National Leagues, kind of had this unspoken agreement as far as players fraternizing with gamblers and the gambling culture involved in baseball. They wanted it out of sight and out of mind, but we're not going to do anything to stop it. Just don't embarrass us.
Yes.
And this whole thing turned into a giant embarrassment because it was so obvious.
It blew up in their face because they kept trying to sweep it under the rug.
Yes.
That was the thing. It was like they'd rather have lived in shit than work a shovel back then.
Right.
Which is why it blew up.
Exactly.
And let's talk about, do you want to get into the trial or do you want to still talk about the fix?
Well, I mean, as far as the fix goes, I mean, they were the best team in baseball.
Yeah.
And
by far.
On the field, it showed. Outside of Jackson in the World Series, the only player to hit over 300 was Buck Weaver, who we had mentioned before. Not even Hall of Famer Eddie Collins. He couldn't even, the joke is he couldn't even hit his own weight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Didn't he go like 1 for 25 or something? Like
something ridiculous, but it's like
the amount, if you look at everyone's stats, you're just like, man, this is not the same ball club from the regular season.
And I don't know if the players who weren't involved with the fix kind of just said, oh man, it's just an uphill battle, and it got in their heads so they couldn't perform and try and, screw everybody over. I know their third starter for the series, Dickie Kerr, won 2 games. Mm-hmm. I mean, he pitched masterfully in that World Series, but it just wasn't enough. But guys like Collins not producing. Schalk had a pretty good World Series, but I mean, just the rest of the team couldn't pick him up.
Now, who was the gambler that was in contact with Gandil the whole time?
I believe it was Sports Sullivan.
Sports Sullivan.
Yeah.
And this was an interesting one for me from a gambler's perspective. Was he couldn't get money down on a good odds, so when he got money down, it was even money. And he was betting game by game, and he didn't know that the third game wasn't thrown.
Yeah, because Kerr pitched that game. And everyone assumed, well, that was the funny thing, is because Red wasn't their third starter for that. Kerr was kind of like their swing starter, like bullpen guy, just mop-up guy. And he was a younger kid, so everyone assumed, like, we don't even need to care. Like, they're just going to lose. They would lose this on their own if everyone was playing on the level.
Yes.
And I think Sleepy Bill Burns, all the gamblers, what ended up happening was these gamblers started stiffing the players or giving money to Gandil that he just wasn't distributing.
Yes. It's hard to say which one of those was happening.
Yeah, that's kind of up for debate.
Yes. But that's definitely when you could see the players being like, F this, because there was a turn in that series.
There was.
Where the players were like, this is ridiculous. If I don't have money in my pocket, like, and that was the other thing with Seacott getting that $10,000 up front.
Yeah.
And they hear about that and they're like, whoa, what the hell? I've gotten zero.
The gamblers double-crossed the players, and then the players started double-crossing the gamblers, but it was too late.
Yes.
It was just too late because they were down, I think, 4-1.
Well, gambling was so prevalent. This was another thing I wanted to bring up was there was talks about the Reds throwing Game 3.
Interesting.
And the Reds manager came out and said, that's such bullshit, but I'll tell you this. There was a gambler that came around my pitching staff the night before trying to get him drunk, and I had to get people to get him out of there.
I wouldn't doubt it.
But that's how prevalent it was.
Yeah.
They saw that the Reds were better odds, so they're like, well, let's see if we'll get the Reds to fix it now. Like, that's how ridiculously involved and integrated gambling was in baseball.
Yeah, and if you're offering these players more than their yearly salary to throw 1 game, 2 games, who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very attractive, enticing offer.
Older baseball players were talking about the amount of money. I mean, older in 1919 when this came out, they're like, yeah, we used to take bribes all the time. We used to take, like to shave a little point here, or like miss something there.
Yeah, they were throwing mid-season games all the time. It didn't matter. That had no bearing on who would win the pennant.
Exactly. So let's get into the trial.
Let's get into the trial a little bit.
Because here's something that I didn't know. And it's kind of, if it's true, was Joe Jackson was illiterate?
Yes, he was. He had not really received much of an education and grew up working in mills before he started playing semi-pro and played for the A's and then the Indians and then the White Sox.
And his wife read everything for him.
Yeah. He would, at restaurants, I won't call it funny because it's really disheartening to read, but like he'd go out with the guys after a game, they'd go and grab a bite to eat, and he would always be the last one to order because he couldn't read the menu.
Yes.
And then all of his friends would order who were at the table with him, and then he would go, okay, whatever I like best, that's what I'm going to order.
Yeah, like so when this started being splashed all over the papers that they were cheating, he actually really didn't know, and he would look at his fellow teammates and you'd see their faces, and that's when he started to get the realization that like, hey, I think people are starting to put these dots together that, hey, we threw the 1919 World Series.
Yeah, and the reason that this went to trial is because one of the gamblers started talking, and Comiskey, and on behalf of Comiskey, the right fielder who didn't throw the series, they were charging the White Sox with defrauding the business for not competing. So they all went in front of a grand jury and beforehand had to give their statements, and both Seacott and Jackson were the ones to sing.
Well, the trial started off wild. So
yeah. Insane. Yeah. This is
they had Seacott and Shoeless Joe who wrote confessions, and some people are saying that Shoeless Joe was given a confession and he signed it.
Yeah.
But before the trial started, they were lost. So they had record of them being in file, but somebody went in and pretty much destroyed them.
And they allegedly ended up in the briefcase of Charles Comiskey's lawyer.
Yes.
That's where they went. Because Comiskey was also nervous. He's like, I'm so pissed they threw the World Series. I hope all of these guys die in a fire. But if this comes out, they might take my team away from me, and baseball might go into the crapper. And while all of this is going on, mind you, this is 1920. This is late summer of 1920. The White Sox are competing with the Cleveland Indians
for a pennant
in the AL. And Comiskey suspends his players. Now, if you weren't listening before to the quote, 8 men out, end quote, 6 of these were position players, or 6 of these position players, 5 of which were starters and their best players, and your 2 best starting pitchers in Seacott and Lefty Williams.
It was without a doubt their best players, like outside of, the utility guy, but best 2 starting pitchers. They're pretty much whole infield and left field with Joe Jackson. Like it's insane.
And half Felch in center. Yeah.
Yes, it's like, and they proceeded to lose the pennant, obviously.
Yeah, because all this craziness was going on for them.
Something else I found wild about the trial was the way that how do I even put this? The way that it was perceived by the public.
Yeah.
So a lot of the people didn't even know it was fixed, and when this first started to come out, people are like, "Wait, what?" They're flat out admitting it. Like,
yeah,
they couldn't believe that they were so guilty.
Yeah, no, I mean, your average person, and this still goes for your average person now. We all have that feeling that when we watch
the
competition,
Houston Astros win the 2018 World Series, that it was on the level.
Yeah, but I mean, we all want to live in this fantasy world where everything is on the level. Everyone is competing fairly. Everyone, is not getting an illegal edge.
Yeah.
And this whole trial, the grand jury indictment, and then the whole trial was just illustrating to people like, this is a major problem.
Yeah, how corrupt baseball is.
Even from that, whether it's true or not, that little kid talking like, "Say it ain't so, Joe. Say it ain't so."
That is the classic line from it. And
yeah.
Joe couldn't say anything.
No.
Yeah.
No, because...
But everybody kind of feels like that little 12-year-old kid who's watching baseball is like, why would you do this? Why would you destroy this thing that everybody loves?
Yeah, and you think it's pure. You've come right out of the First World War. Baseball is growing, and you go and do this to us, the public, and defraud us? No, absolutely not.
Especially in that time where I bet winning a World Series, they're like, why would you take any amount of money?
Yeah.
But, I mean, whatever. You see how bitter the players were. That's why they ended up taking this.
Yeah, and like I talked about before, there were factions on the team. I mean, they would joke, you have the Black Sox, which was pretty much comprised of all of the 8 men out.
Yep.
And then they derisively called people like Eddie Collins and Schalk, they called them the Clean Sox.
Yes.
Because they were never involved in any of this. They didn't run in those gambling circles. I mean, like Collins, they're college educated. They never had to worry about money.
It's interesting how, and I bet this still kind of happens in teams where you have, especially in football, where you have offense and defense, and you're just like, hey, man, you're not sitting over here. We're defense.
Exactly.
But with baseball, I feel like there should be more cohesion, but I bet it's not. I bet it's really two factions playing on the same team a lot of the time.
A lot of the time, I would say, probably not as divided as football.
Yeah.
But nowadays, starting pitchers are kind of their own animal. I mean, they keep to themselves. It's like I have a routine. It's 5 days.
Yep.
Then I go to work, and then another 5 days I go to work. I mean, can be surly at times, but I would say that's really the only divisions you have now.
Yeah.
But as far as the trial's concerned, they ended up playing out the 1920 season without their best players and losing. And then again, June 27th, 1921, the trial finally starts. And during the trial, things get a little interesting as far as what happens to the players. And it's interesting because despite all of the massive amounts of evidence, they were all acquitted in a criminal court of law for throwing the World Series.
This is something that I found interesting because I never knew that they were acquitted. My thought coming into this was that they were guilty and then suspended.
No.
But they were acquitted, and then that made baseball. I feel like the owners of baseball, after they were acquitted, were like, hey, we need some governing body over
Precisely.
this that can be like, hey, we obviously know that they did this, and we need to bring down the hammer.
Yes, and that's what they were actually planning this, the baseball owners, including Comiskey. They were looking for a commissioner of this league to get everything at least on the level more than it had been.
Yeah, everybody on the same page.
Everyone was on the same page saying, this can't happen again. This could destroy the entire idea of baseball, professional baseball in America. So they sought out a certain gentleman who was a federal judge at the time, named Kennesaw Mountain Landis. And did you want to talk about Landis for a little bit here?
Yeah. Let's get into Landis a little bit. He's the first commissioner ever, and I guess supposedly they wanted 3 commissioners and wanted it to be like a vote. And Landis said, "No, if you want me, I'm going to be the only one."
Yeah.
And then that pretty much made. We have one commissioner from now on. From that point.
Oh yeah.
In baseball, so he pretty much made baseball's governing body the way that it is now.
Oh, he totally did, and he came in with an iron fist.
Yes.
And that's what the owners loved about him, is he was no nonsense and just very...
He was a federal judge. He was ready to cast judgment.
And due to this, because he's commissioner of baseball, once these players are acquitted, guess what happens when Landis sees this?
I think it was the next day.
Yeah.
He immediately bars them from baseball for life.
Yeah. Put them all on the ineligible list.
So it was the 8 players and one other player from, God, I want to say the Indians, who was friends with them, who got a message.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Who got a message from, I want to say CCOT, that, hey, we're throwing the series if you want to bet on it. So he bet on the series, and Landis was like, I'm putting the hammer down so hard that even if you're betting on the series, I'm going to suspend you for life.
Yeah, no.
So it was what baseball needed.
And he had used as precedent for this because before, basically the Dodgers and Giants moved to California. The Pacific Coast League was like the strongest minor league system, because you had teams in like San Diego, LA, San Francisco. A lot of famous baseball players from the 30s through the 50s played in the PCL, like Joe DiMaggio, Ted Williams, Bobby Dorr.
And ended up going to New York.
Because it was like the feeder system for these teams.
Yep.
But he had used an old Pacific Coast League precedent about players who were gambling, and they'd kicked them all out.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
I had read about that. Yeah, it was pretty, because nothing like that had ever happened before.
Exactly.
Nothing like that had ever happened. And what I'm curious though of, Landis was a hard ass, so he probably would have, put him on the ineligible list regardless of the way the trial went. But what would have happened if all of the players were guilty?
If they weren't
acquitted?
If they saw jail time, possibly?
Yeah. Would he have brought them back? I still say no, but it's always an interesting thing to think about.
That is interesting, because he is a federal judge, and he might have looked at that jail time as
time served.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
If Joe Jackson could have came back, he was hitting 380 in that last season.
Here's the thing about Joe Jackson. God. For those of you who aren't baseball fans, that you need to realize, Joe Jackson was beloved by Ty Cobb. Ty Cobb hated everyone. Ty Cobb hated everyone, but he loved Joe Jackson. Do you know why? Because Joe Jackson could rake like a mother blanker in the dead ball era.
Oh, yeah.
He still, in the history of Major League Baseball, has the 3rd highest batting average. And this wasn't a singles hitter. This is a dude who led the league in triples multiple times when triples was king.
And he was going into his prime.
Oh, he was.
That was the other thing, was he was right at that 8-9 year where the guys really lock into their hitting, and they really lock into their just everything.
Babe Ruth modeled his swing after Joe Jackson.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And I know we had talked about this in the Pete Rose thing. The other guys, great players in their own right. But like Pete Rose, Joe Jackson's a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Oh,
like the Hall of Fame came out, I think, in the mid-1930s. The first class was like Ruth, Cobb, Wagner. The greatest ever.
Hornsby,
I think, was still playing when that happened, though. But
he played till he was 60. So.
Yeah, true. But Jackson would have been in that first class.
Yes.
Undoubtedly.
He would have been one of the first names in the first class. It's one of those, like, he would have... It's just such a ridiculously sad turn of events where these baseball players pretty much felt like they needed to throw the World Series.
Yeah.
Some of them.
Yeah, exactly.
I bet there was different opinions on, I bet.
When I know you brought up Buck Weaver, the third baseman, earlier.
Oh, yeah, I want to be.
And one thing I'll add for Weaver, though, is they never nabbed him on throwing games because he wasn't throwing games. But because he went to those initial meetings and knew the fix was in, it's like being accessory to murder. Yes. He was an accessory to the fix despite not getting any money and actually playing on the level.
Which is ridiculous, but
His family, his descendants are still asking Major League Baseball to take him off the ineligible list.
And they should.
Absolutely.
It's one of those things, he should be off the lifetime ban list. Pete Rose should be in the World Series with I don't think yeah, excuse me. I don't think Joe Jackson should be in the Hall of Fame. But I understand.
Yeah.
I understand the both sides of it.
And if you think about it, the fallout of this, like I said, this was the decade of 3 teams in the AL.
Yes.
It also coincides with the end of the dead ball era. Guess who the Red Sox sold Babe Ruth to at the close of the decade?
Yeah. And that's when you see the emergence of New York baseball.
Not only New York baseball, you see the emergence of the chicks dig the long ball era.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean,
Joe Jackson hit the only home run in that series. That's how little home runs were hit.
Yeah.
He hit it and people are like, whoa, I never saw that before. Like,
right?
It's ridiculous. It was a different game, too, It was.
Yeah, Seacott used to throw a spitter and a shine ball. By 1920, 21, those were banned.
Yeah.
Just absolutely crazy.
What is the shine ball?
Like scuff up the ball.
Yeah, just scuff it up.
On your pantlet. Well, Gaylord Perry threw a sandpaper ball, and he's somehow in the Hall of Fame. Yep. Come on.
The sandpaper ball was the one that's ridiculous. They just kind of file it down a little.
Yeah, just going to have that little extra. I'm sure if we talk about the 86 Mets, I want to get into Mike Scott for the Astros, because that is a very famous scandal from that LCS. But back to the Black Sox, though, just kind of, discuss a little bit more.
Let's. I think we're going to wrap this one up.
Yeah. Sounds good. So 8 players from that pennant-winning team saw it fit to deny their team and city a World Series for the almighty dollar.
It's just sad all around.
It really is. But if you think about it, Landis had no other choice.
Yes. It changed baseball forever, but Landis's hammer coming down was what baseball needed because it was so rampant. There was talks of mid-season games getting thrown because they just didn't mean anything. That kind of went out of favor because you saw the punishment that these guys got for fixing, obviously, the biggest game.
And baseball took a very hard line against just being even associated with gamblers or the gambling industry in general. Mickey Mantle was told you can't, be a face of this casino even when he was not playing.
Yeah, I know. Post-career.
Yeah.
They didn't want the stain of gambling anywhere near baseball. That's the legacy of this Black Sox is the taking gambling and keeping it out of baseball for so many years.
And that's what makes that Pete Rose story so sad because the studious, determined person, these Black Sox players, I won't give them a free pass. They dug their own grave, but they didn't know the consequences Pete Rose did.
That's very true. Because the rules were not, the unspoken rules were not in place then.
Yeah.
It was almost commonplace to cheat. Or not cheat, but to,
get a little scratch on the side.
But I still think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. I think everybody here at this podcast thinks that. And I think you at home should think that.
Absolutely.
That's
a sports experience, everybody. I'm Dom DiTolla. You can find me at DiTolla Dominic on my social media.
I'm Chris Quinn. You can find me at C Quinn Comedy. And we just love sports and love talking about sports. So thanks for enjoying this with us.
All right, everyone. Thank you.